The poor maid's baby wouldn't eat anything until the millionaire did the improbable. The Whitmore mansion stood like a monument to everything money could buy and nothing it could heal. At 7 in the evening, crystal chandeliers bathed the dining room in cold light, reflecting off mahogany that cost more than most people earned in a year. 6 chairs surrounded the table, but only 2 held bodies. Harrison Whitmore sat at the head, 35 years old and looking like a man carved from marble, his fork moving food around a plate he had no intention of eating. Across from him, his Aunt Victoria cut her steak with surgical precision, every movement controlled, every glance calculated. The silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against your chest, making it hard to breathe. Harrison's eyes kept drifting to the 3rd chair on his left, the one with the embroidered cushion his wife had chosen 4 years ago. Caroline had been gone for 3 years now, and he still couldn't bring himself to move that chair. The accident replayed in his mind every single day. The sound of metal crushing, the way time slowed down, the moment he realized he was the only one who would walk away. He had inherited a pharmaceutical empire worth billions, controlled 50 hospitals across the country, employed thousands, but he couldn't save the one person who mattered. Tonight was supposed to be just another evening of existing, another performance of being alive. He had no idea everything was about to shatter. By the way, where are you watching this story from? Tell us in the comments, we'd love to know. Because what happened next in that frozen mansion would prove that sometimes the smallest heart can break through the thickest walls, and sometimes salvation comes from the last place you'd ever expect. Harrison's morning started at 5:30, the alarm cutting through dreams he could never remember. He moved through the enormous house like a ghost, passing portraits of ancestors who had built the Whitmore name on precision and control. The home gym was silent except for the mechanical whir of the treadmill, his reflection in the mirror showing a man who exercised not for health but for routine, something to fill the hours. By 7, he was showering in a bathroom bigger than most studio apartments, choosing between suits that all looked the same, preparing for meetings where he signed papers without reading them. Victoria had been managing everything since Caroline died, taking over slowly, meeting by meeting, until Harrison realized he'd become a signature, a name on letterhead, nothing more. Victoria Whitmore had her reasons for the iron grip she kept on her nephew's life. She'd watched her younger brother marry a woman without wealth or connections, watched him die young from a heart attack brought on by stress, leaving her to raise Harrison alone. She had made him successful, protected the family fortune, built walls around him so high that no gold digger could climb them. Every decision she made came from a place she told herself was love, but underneath ran a current of something else, the need to control, the terror of watching him make his brother's mistakes. When she looked at Harrison now, hollow-eyed and mechanical, she told herself this was better than him being used. She just didn't realize she'd already lost him to a different kind of death. Across the city, in a neighborhood where bus exhaust mixed with the smell of cooking from apartments stacked too close together, Lily Chen was living a completely different version of morning. Her alarm went off at 4:45, giving her exactly 30 minutes to shower, dress, and make something resembling breakfast before waking Emma. The 2-year-old slept in a crib pushed against the wall of their single bedroom, tiny fists curled under her chin, fever making her cheeks too pink. Lily pressed her lips to Emma's forehead for the 10th time that night, feeling the heat that wouldn't break, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall with breaths that seemed too shallow. The public clinic had told her to watch and wait, that childhood fevers happened, but Lily knew something was wrong. Emma hadn't eaten in 3 days. The bus ride to the community daycare took 40 minutes. Emma limp in her arms, head heavy against Lily's shoulder. Other mothers on the early route nodded silent greetings, all of them wearing the same exhaustion, the same worry about being late, losing jobs that barely covered rent. Lily signed Emma in at 6:30, handed her to Miss Rodriguez with whispered instructions about the fever, about calling if anything changed, about how she'd come immediately if needed. Miss Rodriguez's eyes were kind, but her words were firm. The daycare couldn't keep sick children. This was Emma's last day until the fever broke. Lily felt her throat close, nodded, kissed Emma's hot forehead one more time, and ran for the next bus that would get her to the Whitmore estate by 7. She'd been cleaning the mansion for exactly 2 weeks, hired through an agency that didn't ask many questions, as long as you showed up on time and didn't steal. The pay was better than the hotel she'd worked at before, enough that she'd almost caught up on the medical bills from when Emma had needed emergency surgery at 6 months old. Lily moved through the enormous house with efficient invisibility, the way good cleaners learn to do. polishing surfaces that never got dirty, vacuuming carpets that never saw footsteps, existing in the margins of other people's wealth. She'd seen Mr. Whitmore exactly 3 times, always from a distance, always moving through rooms like he wasn't really there. The other staff whispered about him, about the wife who died, about how he used to smile. At 10 o'clock, Lily was scrubbing the marble floor in the East Wing hallway when her phone buzzed in her pocket. The supervisor's office. Her hands went cold before she even answered, because calls during work meant only one thing: trouble. Miss Rodriguez's voice was tight with apology and procedure, explaining that Emma had vomited everything, was running 102, couldn't keep water down, needed to be picked up immediately. Lily's vision tunneled, her voice cracking as she said she'd be right there, already moving toward the service entrance. The supervisor appeared in her path like a wall, arms crossed, face carved from the same cold efficiency that ran this entire house. Rules were rules. Leave now. Don't come back. No exceptions, no matter how good the reason. Lily ran anyway because what else could she do when your baby is burning up and can't keep water down, and the free clinic isn't open until 3? She took the bus that felt like it hit every red light in the city, burst into the daycare to find Emma pale and crying, scooped her up and felt how light she'd gotten, how her little body trembled. The rational part of Lily's brain said go to the emergency room, but the terrified part that knew exactly how much an ER visit cost without insurance said go back, finish your shift, get through this one day, and then figure out what to do. She made the choice that desperate mothers make, the kind that haunts you later, slipping back into the mansion through the delivery entrance, Emma wrapped in her jacket, praying no one would notice. The laundry room was at the far end of the service wing, industrial machines humming loud enough to cover the sound of a sick toddler. Lily set Emma down on a pile of clean linens, smoothing her daughter's sweat-damp hair, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep about everything being okay. Emma's eyes were glassy, her little chest hiccuping with leftover sobs, but she seemed calmer in the warm room, surrounded by the white noise of dryers. Lily kissed her forehead, tasted salt and fever, and told herself she just needed 2 more hours. 2 hours to finish the day, collect her pay, figure out the next step. She turned to grab her cleaning cart, and that's when Emma, in the way that 2-year-olds do, decided she didn't want to be alone. The little girl's unsteady feet carried her out of the laundry room and into the marble corridors she'd never seen before. Everything was so big, so shiny, her reflection stretching weird in the polished floor. She left a trail of footprints, her shoes still damp from playing in the daycare's water table that morning, tiny marks of dirt across perfection. She wandered past closed doors and empty rooms drawn by the sound of voices because voices meant people and people meant maybe her mama. She pushed open a heavy door with both hands, stumbling forward into a room where 2 people sat at a table covered in papers, where everything suddenly went very, very quiet. Victoria had chosen the formal dining room for this particular signing because she knew Harrison hated it here, and she wanted him uncomfortable. Wanted him focused on business instead of whatever melancholy had been dragging him under lately. The merger documents were spread across the table, millions of dollars in pharmaceutical acquisitions that would expand the Whitmore empire into 3 new states. She was explaining the tax implications, her voice sharp and certain, when the door opened and a child fell through it. A child, in the formal dining room, with dirty shoes and a tear-stained face and fever-bright eyes, crumpling to the floor with a wail that shattered 3 years of careful silence. Harrison stood so fast his chair scraped against marble, a sound like a scream. He stared at the tiny figure on the floor, this impossible small person who shouldn't exist in his world of contracts and control. Then Lily crashed through the door, her face drained of all color, hands shaking as she reached for Emma, words tumbling out in desperate whispers about being so sorry, about leaving right away, about how this would never happen again. But Emma, confused and sick and wanting comfort from anyone, grabbed onto the first solid thing she could reach, the leg of Harrison's expensive suit pants, her small fingers twisted in the fabric, her sobs muffled against his knee. Harrison looked down at the child clinging to him, at the hot tears soaking through Italian wool, at the small shuddering body that weighed nothing but felt like everything. Something cracked in his chest, something he'd kept frozen since the day he buried his wife and the son who never got to be born. His vision blurred and he realized with distant shock that he was crying, the first tears in 3 years sliding down his face while Victoria hissed about what absurd situation was this. and Lily whispered apologies, and Emma just held on like he was the only stable thing in a spinning world. He dropped to his knees without deciding to, his expensive suit hitting the floor he'd just paid Lily to polish. His hands hovered near Emma's small shoulders, not quite touching, as if she might disappear if he reached too fast. The little girl looked up at him with eyes too big for her flushed face, and Harrison felt something he'd thought was dead forever, the pull of being needed by someone who didn't care about his money or his name or his grief, just a sick child looking for comfort. Just a moment that felt like fate had reached down and grabbed him by the throat, and the question burned in the air, unspoken but impossible to ignore. What would a man who had lost everything do when given an unexpected chance to hold something precious again? Emma's fingers stayed locked in the fabric of Harrison's suit, her small body radiating heat that seeped through the expensive material. He remained frozen on his knees, caught between the instinct to comfort and the rust of 3 years without touching anyone who mattered. Victoria's voice cut through the moment like a blade, demanding Lily's immediate termination, her words sharp with authority she'd wielded unchallenged for too long. Lily reached for Emma with trembling hands, trying to pry her daughter away, whispering please and sorry in a voice that barely worked. But Emma's lungs filled with air and she screamed a single word that echoed off marble and crystal. No! The force of it surprised everyone, this tiny, sick child suddenly possessing the will of someone fighting for survival. Harrison's hand went up, palm out, a gesture he'd used in 1,000 boardroom negotiations, but never with his aunt. The word that came from his throat sounded like it had traveled through gravel. Wait. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed, shock registering across features that rarely showed anything but control. In that suspended moment, Harrison looked at the child clinging to him and asked the only question that mattered. What's wrong with her? His eyes moved to Lily, actually seeing her for the first time, taking in the exhaustion carved into a face too young to carry so much weight. Lily's voice cracked as she explained 3 days without eating, appointments that wouldn't come for another week, watching her daughter fade and not knowing how to stop it. Victoria's response came loaded with contempt that she didn't bother hiding. This isn't our concern. But Harrison was already pulling his phone from his pocket, scrolling through contacts he hadn't touched in years, finding Dr. Marcus's private number. The pediatrician who delivered half the children in the city's wealthiest zip codes answered on the second ring, and Harrison's instructions were clear. Come to the mansion within the hour, bring whatever equipment necessary. Money was no object. He ended the call before Dr. Marcus could ask questions, his attention returning to Emma, whose grip had loosened slightly, but whose eyes hadn't left his face. Something about being needed by someone so small rewired something in Harrison's brain that had been dark for too long. The argument that followed was the first real collision between Harrison and Victoria since he'd stopped fighting about anything that mattered. She accused him of being manipulated, of falling for the oldest trick in the book, a desperate woman using a sick child to gain access to wealth she could never touch otherwise. Her voice dripped with certainty about human nature, about the dangers of vulnerability, about how many women had tried similar approaches after Caroline died. Harrison stayed on his knees beside Emma, but when he turned his face toward Victoria, she actually stepped back. The look in his eyes was something she hadn't seen since he was a teenager, refusing to attend the boarding school she'd chosen. Pure, unshakable determination. She's just a sick child, Victoria. A child. The words were simple, but they carried weight that made Victoria's accusations feel small and cruel. Victoria's retreat was tactical, not surrender. She fixed Lily with a stare that promised consequences, her words precise. I'm watching you. Then she swept from the room, heels clicking a rhythm of barely contained rage. Lily stood in the space Victoria had vacated, arms wrapped around herself, unsure whether to thank Harrison or run before whatever storm was building could catch her. Emma had finally released Harrison's pants, distracted by the arrival of Dr. Marcus, whose calm efficiency filled the room as he unpacked equipment that looked more advanced than anything in the public clinic, where Lily usually waited 4 hours to be seen. The doctor's examination was thorough but gentle, his questions directed at both Lily and Harrison, as if they were co-parents navigating this together. The diagnosis came with measured words that somehow made everything clearer and more complicated at once. Minor infection, easily treated with antibiotics, but the refusal to eat stemmed from something deeper, behavioral response to environmental stress. Dr. Marcus explained how children Emma's age absorbed their caregivers' anxiety like sponges, how instability translated into their bodies as rejection of sustenance. He wrote a prescription and then delivered the harder truth. She needed to feel safe, needed consistency, needed an environment where the adults around her weren't drowning. His gaze settled on Lily with professional sympathy that cut deeper than judgment would have, and she felt herself crumbling under the weight of knowing she couldn't provide what her daughter required. Harrison spoke before thinking, the words escaping in a rush that surprised him. "Stay here. The guest house in the back, it's empty. Stay until she's better." The offer hung in the air, absurd and generous and completely impractical. Victoria's explosion was immediate, her return to the room theatrical, demanding to know if Harrison had lost his mind entirely. But his response came cold and final, the voice he'd used to fire entire executive teams. "My house. My decision." Lily's pride flared, her first instinct to refuse, to maintain the dignity that was all she had left. Then Emma whimpered, her small hand reaching for Lily's face, and the choice became impossible. She accepted with words that tasted like defeat, but felt like survival. The first 48 hours in the guest house passed in a blur of unpacking borrowed linens and trying to understand the rules of this new reality. The space was 3 times larger than the apartment Lily had been 1 month from losing, with actual separate rooms and windows that overlooked gardens instead of parking lots. But size didn't equal comfort, and Lily moved through it like someone expecting to be thrown out at any moment. She kept Emma quiet, kept their presence minimal, cleaned obsessively even though she wasn't being paid to clean here. And Emma still wouldn't eat. Every attempt met with the same sealed lips, the same turning away, the same hollowness in her daughter's eyes that made Lily want to scream. By the 3rd night, Lily had stopped sleeping entirely. At 11, she crept into the main house's kitchen, a space bigger than her entire apartment had been, trying to prepare a special oatmeal her own mother used to make when Lily was sick. The recipe required patience she didn't have, stirring constantly to get the texture right, adding cinnamon and honey in proportions she barely remembered. She didn't hear Harrison descend the back stairs, didn't know he was there until he cleared his throat, and she nearly dropped the pot. They both froze, awkward in the dim kitchen light, neither sure what to say to the other. His eyes found Emma in the portable chair Lily had brought, the toddler's face pale against the padding, and he asked the question that had been haunting both of them. Lily's composure shattered like glass hitting tile. She shook her head, unable to form words around the sob building in her throat, and finally let the tears come. "I don't know what else to do. I'm losing her." The admission felt like failure, like every inadequacy she'd ever felt as a mother crystallizing into this one moment of helplessness. Harrison stared at her, then at Emma, then at the pot of cooling oatmeal. Something shifted in his expression, a decision made without conscious thought, and he moved toward the stove before he could talk himself out of it. He picked up the spoon Lily had abandoned, filled it with oatmeal, and sat down beside Emma's chair with the careful movements of someone approaching something fragile. What happened next would be the thing Lily remembered for the rest of her life, the moment when everything changed direction. Harrison brought the spoon to his own mouth, his expression deadly serious as he chewed the oatmeal with exaggerated motions that would have been comical in any other context. He made sounds of appreciation that were completely ridiculous coming from a man who'd eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants around the world. "Delicious," he declared, his voice carrying the same gravity he'd used to announce multi-million-dollar acquisitions. Emma's crying stopped. Her eyes went wide. He loaded another spoon and held it toward her, his question gentle. "Want to try what Uncle Harrison thinks tastes so good?" The moment stretched impossibly long, Emma's gaze moving between the spoon and Harrison's face. Lily held her breath so completely her lungs burned. From the doorway, unnoticed until now, Victoria stood watching with an expression of pure horror, witnessing her nephew making a fool of himself for a stranger's child. Emma's mouth opened. The spoon disappeared inside. She swallowed, reached for another, and another. 4 days of refusing every food suddenly ended with oatmeal fed by a billionaire who'd forgotten how to smile until this exact second. Lily's sob of relief was half laugh, half prayer. Harrison's face transformed, muscles remembering how to arrange themselves into joy, and for 3 full seconds the kitchen held nothing but the sound of a child eating, and 2 adults remembering what hope felt like. Victoria melted back into the shadows of the hallway, her mind already racing through contingencies and countermeasures. By the time she reached her private study, her phone was already at her ear, her voice low and urgent as she spoke to someone whose profession specialized in digging up secrets people preferred buried. "I need everything on Lily Chen. Employment history, financial records, relationships, Anything that explains why she's suddenly living in my nephew's guest house. I want to know if this sick child routine was calculated. She ended the call and stood at the window, watching the lights in the guest house, her reflection in the glass showing someone who believed she was protecting family, but couldn't see she might be destroying the first good thing to happen in years. In the kitchen, Lily was thanking Harrison with words that couldn't possibly convey what she felt, while Emma ate another spoonful and smiled for the first time since getting sick. Neither of them noticed the storm gathering, the investigation beginning, the machinery of suspicion and protection grinding into motion. They only saw a child eating, a crisis averted, a stranger who'd done something impossibly kind. But the calm wouldn't last, and the question burning beneath everything was simple. How much would Harrison risk to keep this fragile new connection alive when the people meant to protect him decided it was dangerous? 3 weeks transformed the Whitmore mansion from mausoleum into something resembling a home. Though the change was so gradual, no one could pinpoint exactly when it happened. Emma's cheeks filled out, color returning to skin that had been paper-thin, her laughter echoing through hallways that hadn't heard a child's voice in the entire time Harrison had owned the property. Mornings developed a rhythm nobody had planned. Harrison sitting at the kitchen counter with Emma perched on a stool beside him, her tiny hands wrapped around a sippy cup while he drank coffee and pretended to read her the financial reports spread across the granite. She'd grab crayons and scribble across documents worth millions, and he'd nod seriously, asking her opinion on quarterly projections she couldn't begin to understand. The afternoons belonged to architecture lessons neither of them knew they were teaching. Emma discovered that the mansion's countless throw pillows could become castles if you stacked them right, and Harrison found himself on his hands and knees helping construct towers that defied physics and common sense. His $5,000 suit jackets got smeared with the strawberry jam from Emma's sandwiches, and he stopped caring somewhere around the second week. Lily would find them in the library, Emma directing Harrison like a tiny foreman, him following her instructions with the same intensity he'd once brought to board meetings. When Emma's castle inevitably collapsed, her giggles mixed with his surprised bark of laughter created a sound that made Lily's chest ache in ways she couldn't name. The nightmares came for Harrison in the small hours, same as they had for 3 years, but now they were sharper. He'd dream of the accident in high definition, the sound of Caroline's scream, the way the steering wheel felt under his hands as he tried and failed to correct the skid, the moment of impact that he survived and she didn't. In the dreams, he could see the baby too, the son who'd been 8 months from birth, who he'd already named Michael, who never got a single breath. He'd wake gasping, sheets soaked, and the guilt would press down like a physical weight. But now Emma existed in the guest house, sleeping peacefully because Harrison had helped her feel safe enough to eat. The irony wasn't lost on him. He couldn't save his own child, but maybe he could save someone else's. The kitchen became their confessional. 11 o'clock, the hour when people spoke truths they couldn't say in daylight. Lily learned that Harrison kept a collection of vinyl jazz records from the 40s, that he'd play them alone in his study when the silence got too heavy. Harrison discovered Lily had been 3 semesters from her teaching degree when she'd gotten pregnant, that Ryan had promised marriage and stability before vanishing the day she told him about Emma. They didn't sit close, always kept the island counter between them, but proximity wasn't measured in inches. It showed up in how Harrison started leaving the last slice of chocolate cake untouched because he'd noticed it was Lily's favorite, how Lily began folding his cloth napkins into intricate origami shapes she'd learned from a YouTube video, just to see his eyebrows raise in surprised appreciation. The moment came on a Thursday, Emma playing with her stuffed animals on the library rug, while Harrison worked on his laptop nearby. She was narrating an elaborate story about a bear and a bunny going on an adventure, her voice high and serious, when she looked up at Harrison and the word just slipped out naturally. "Daddy, can the bear fly?" The Mandarin term for father hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Lily appeared in the doorway, having heard from the hallway, her face draining of blood as she rushed to correct Emma, apologies tumbling over themselves. But Harrison had already closed his laptop, already moved to kneel beside the little girl who just named him something he'd never gotten to be. His voice came out steady despite the earthquake in his chest. "I would really like to be, sweetheart. Very much." Emma processed this with the simple logic of someone who hadn't learned yet that the world was complicated, then threw her arms around his neck with the full force of her 30 pounds. Harrison's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, and Lily had to turn away because watching them was like looking directly at the sun. She pressed her palm against her mouth to muffle the sound trying to escape. Not quite sob, not quite laugh, something in between that hurt and healed simultaneously. When she finally looked back, Harrison's eyes were waiting for hers, and the question in them was one neither was ready to answer out loud. Victoria's investigator worked with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 20 years finding dirt on people who thought they'd buried it deep. Jeffrey Kramer had a face that blended into crowds and a talent for making people talk without realizing they'd revealed anything important. He photographed Lily leaving the mansion at dawn, followed her on the 2 mornings she visited the free health clinic for Emma's follow-up appointments, interviewed the superintendent at her old building who remembered her as quiet, always paid late, but paid eventually. The credit card companies handed over records showing medical debts that would take years to clear. The county clerk's office provided the hospital lawsuit over an unpaid emergency room bill from when Emma had needed surgery as an infant, and the correctional facility database gave up Ryan Chen's current address, state prison, 18 months into a 3-year sentence for wire fraud and identity theft. Victoria received Jeffrey's report in her private office, reading each page with the satisfaction of someone whose suspicions were being confirmed. She didn't care that Lily had never hidden being a single mother, didn't consider that medical debt was the #1 cause of bankruptcy in the country, saw only what she wanted to see: evidence of instability, connection to crime, desperation that could make a woman do calculated things. She waited until dinner, until Lily was serving the roasted chicken Harrison had specifically requested because Emma liked it, to deploy her weapon with surgical precision. Her voice carried just the right tone of casual concern, as she mentioned that their current house guest had interesting connections to the criminal justice system. Harrison set down his fork with controlled force, the sound of silver hitting china sharp in the quiet room. "Explain." Victoria's smile had edges as she laid it out. Emma's father currently incarcerated, financial fraud his specialty, a man who'd made a living convincing people to trust him before taking everything they had. She let the implications hang unspoken. Let Harrison's imagination fill in the blanks about what kind of woman would be involved with such a man, what kind of skills that woman might have learned. Lily stood frozen by the sideboard, the serving platter trembling in her hands as her entire past was dissected by someone who'd never asked for her version of events. Harrison's response came cold enough to frost the windows. "Someone's past doesn't define their present, Victoria. You of all people should understand that." The defense landed, but so had the attack, and everyone in the room knew it. Victoria retreated to strategic silence, having accomplished her goal. The seed of doubt planted, questions raised that couldn't be unasked. Lily finished serving with hands that wouldn't quite steady, then excused herself before anyone could see her face crack completely. She made it to the guest house before the tears came, sitting on the floor with her back against the door, wondering how long she had before Harrison decided Victoria was right, before this impossible reprieve ended, and she was back where she'd started, but with Emma having lost the closest thing to a father she'd ever known. Emma's 3rd birthday arrived with autumn, turning the mansion's grounds into something from a painting, leaves gold and red against manicured green. Lily had planned something modest: cupcakes from the grocery store, a few presents bought with money she barely had, maybe a movie on the laptop. She woke that morning to find Harrison had transformed the entire garden into a carnival. Balloons in every color tied to chairs arranged around tables laden with food she'd only seen at weddings. A professional entertainer practicing juggling near a bounce house that hadn't been there yesterday. Harrison standing in the middle of it all looking slightly panicked, clearly worried he'd overstepped, and Lily burst into tears before she could stop herself. Grateful tears, overwhelmed tears, the kind that came from someone remembering what it felt like when people cared. The party filled with people Lily hadn't expected to see. Neighbors from her old building who'd taken 3 buses to get here, the nurses from the free clinic, Miss Rodriguez from the community daycare, all of them mixing with mansion staff who treated Emma like visiting royalty. Emma wore a dress Harrison had bought, spinning in circles to make the skirt flare, her laughter the soundtrack to the afternoon. The moment came when Harrison approached with a package wrapped in paper covered in butterflies, kneeling to present it at Emma's level. Inside was a teddy bear, soft and brown, with a blue ribbon around its neck, and the way Harrison held it suggested it meant more than just a toy. His voice barely made it past a whisper. "I want her to have this." Lily understood without being told. This was the bear meant for the son who never came home. Her hand found his without planning to, fingers weaving together for exactly 3 seconds before the weight of the gesture made them both pull away. But those 3 seconds contained conversations they hadn't had, admissions they couldn't make, futures that felt both impossible and inevitable. From the mansion's second-floor window, Victoria watched the contact, her jaw working with thoughts that showed in the rigid line of her spine. She'd already made the call to Jeffrey for the complete dossier, had already decided that tonight would be the night she saved Harrison from his own generous nature, from the trap she was certain Lily had laid with calculated precision. The party continued below, oblivious. 30 people celebrating a child who'd found her way into the heart of a man who'd thought his was too broken to beat again. Evening came soft and purple, Emma's energy finally depleting after hours of running and playing and eating cake until her face was more frosting than skin. She'd curled up in Harrison's lap in the library, thumb in her mouth, bear clutched to her chest, while adults cleaned up outside. Lily was folding tablecloths, lost in the surreal quality of the day, when Harrison's voice cut through her thoughts. "I don't want you to leave. Ever." The words weren't quite a question, more a confession spoken to the room at large, like he needed to hear himself say it out loud before he could believe it was true. Lily froze mid-fold, the tablecloth slipping from her hands. She turned to find him watching her with an intensity that made breathing difficult. Harrison, but he was already committed, already stepping off the cliff. "I know it's insane. I know you probably see me as just the man who pays you. But I've started waking up and the first thing I think about is whether Emma ate breakfast, whether you got enough sleep. I've been dead for 3 years and you two walked into my house and suddenly I'm alive again, and I don't know what to do with that except ask you to stay." Lily's face was wet before she realized she was crying, her response forming around a sob. "You're not crazy. I feel—" She never got to finish because Victoria appeared in the doorway with Jeffrey beside her, the investigator holding a folder thick enough to contain someone's entire history. Victoria's voice carried triumph as she crossed the room. "We need to talk. Now." The folder hit the desk with a slap that made Emma stir, and then photographs were spilling out. Ryan in an orange jumpsuit, Lily's credit card statements highlighted in yellow, court documents stamped with amounts Lily would be paying off for years. Jeffrey added his professional assessment in the flat tone of someone reciting facts. Subject has significant financial liabilities, intimate connection to convicted felon currently serving time for fraud, pattern of unstable employment, prior to position at this residence. Victoria delivered the final blow. "She's a liar, Harrison. Everything about her presence here was calculated." Harrison's hands moved through the papers, his face unreadable, a mask Lily had never seen him wear before. She tried to speak, to explain that yes, all of it was true, but none of it was what Victoria was implying, that she'd never hidden who she was, just never found the right moment to recite her failures as credentials. But her voice had disappeared, shock and shame stealing every word. Emma woke crying, sensing the tension the way children do, her wails filling the library with soundtrack to the implosion. Victoria pressed her advantage, her voice reasonable and concerned and absolutely certain. She saw a vulnerable, wealthy man and used her sick child to access your life. How many desperate women do you think would do exactly the same? Harrison closed his eyes and Lily watched everything she'd started to hope for die in real time. When he opened them again, something burned there that could have been anger or betrayal, or the realization that he'd been a fool. His gaze moved between Victoria's triumphant face and Lily's devastated one, then down to Emma, who was reaching for him even while crying, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter. The silence stretched until Lily thought it might break her, until Victoria smiled like someone who'd just won a war, until Harrison's mouth opened, and whatever he said next would determine if the last 3 weeks had been real, or if Lily had been living in a fantasy that was always destined to end exactly like this. Harrison's voice cut through the chaos with surgical precision, demanding everyone leave except Lily. Victoria's protest died at the look on his face, something she recognized from when he'd been younger and less broken, before Caroline's death had smoothed him into compliance. Jeffrey gathered his papers while Victoria positioned herself outside the library doors like a sentinel, close enough to intervene if needed. The clock on the mantel read 2 in the morning, the hour when exhaustion stripped away pretense and left only raw truth. Harrison stood with his back to the window, arms crossed, the businessman's stance warring with the tremble in his jaw. "Is it true? All of it?" His voice came out controlled but fragile, like ice over deep water. Lily met his eyes despite every instinct screaming to look away, to make herself smaller, to apologize for existing in a way that complicated his life. "Yes, Ryan is Emma's father and he's in prison. Yes, I have debts I'll be paying until Emma's in college. But I never hid who I am, Harrison. I never asked for anything beyond work. Never planned any of this. The words came firm, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Because if this was ending, it would end with her dignity intact. She'd been judged her entire adult life for choosing to keep Emma, for staying with Ryan too long, for not having enough money or the right background, and she was done shrinking to fit other people's narrow definitions of acceptable. Harrison moved closer, his question landing like an accusation. Why didn't you tell me about him? Lily's laugh was bitter, the sound of someone who'd had this conversation in different variations too many times. Because people judge me before they know me. Because I'm not him. Emma isn't him. I was trying to rebuild a life without being defined by the mistakes of a man who abandoned us the day he found out I was pregnant. Her voice gained strength, years of held-back frustration pouring out. But you let me get attached. Let Emma call you Daddy. Knowing that, Harrison's interruption was sharp. Knowing what? Lily's response came loaded with every insecurity she'd carried. Knowing that I'm too poor, too problematic? That a woman like me doesn't deserve a man like you to care? The question hung between them, exposing the class divide neither had named directly until now. Harrison's face shifted, vulnerability replacing anger, and what came out next was confession, not accusation. My wife died because I was driving distracted, arguing on the phone about money. Money. We were fighting about pharmaceutical patents while she was 8 months pregnant and I missed the stop sign. His voice cracked on the last word. 3 years of guilt compressing into a single admission. Victoria tells me you might be here because of that same money, and I don't know how to. He couldn't finish, but Lily was already moving, fury igniting in her chest like someone had struck a match. You actually think I would plan to use my sick daughter? That I could sleep at night pretending to feel what I feel for you? Her voice rose, all the quiet acceptance she'd worn like armor shattering into rage. I may be poor, Harrison, but I'm not hollow. I'm not some calculating monster who would watch my child suffer as part of a scheme. The fact that you'd even consider it tells me maybe Victoria's right about one thing. Maybe we're from worlds too different to bridge. The words came out harsh, designed to wound because she was wounded. Because the man she'd started loving was standing there wondering if she was a con artist, and that hurt worse than anything Ryan had ever done. Victoria chose that moment to re-enter, Jeffrey trailing behind with additional documentation. Her timing too perfect to be coincidental. She'd been listening, waiting for the exact right moment to deliver the killing blow. Her voice carried the reasonableness of someone explaining simple facts to children. Harrison, the board knows about this situation. They're prepared to vote for your removal as CEO if you continue this insanity. You end this now or you lose everything. The company, the fortune, the Whitmore name. You have 24 hours to decide. Jeffrey added his contribution with clinical detachment. We also found records of Ryan attempting contact with Miss Chen from prison. He's up for early release in 3 months. Parole board already approved it. He's told his cellmate he's coming back for his daughter. The mention of Ryan turned Lily's fury into something colder and more terrifying. Fear. She'd hoped prison would make him forget. That 3 years would erase whatever possessive instinct had made him claim Emma despite never wanting to be a father. The verbal abuse, the manipulation, the way he'd made her doubt her own reality until she'd finally found the courage to leave. All of it came flooding back. I need to protect Emma. If he comes back, her voice disappeared into the thought. Every nightmare scenario playing out at once. Victoria's smile was poisonous triumph. See? More problems you'll dump on Harrison. You're a walking disaster, sweetheart. The endearment dripped with contempt, and Lily absorbed it like a blow, knowing Victoria had won because she'd brought evidence where Lily only had truth. Lily looked at Harrison and saw the war happening behind his eyes, saw 3 years of reconstructing himself after devastation, saw a man being forced to choose between healing and surviving in the world he'd always known. She made the decision for him because she couldn't watch him tear himself apart. I'll leave. Tomorrow morning. Harrison's protest came immediate and desperate. You don't have to. But Lily cut him off, her voice steady again, now that the choice was made. I do. Emma and I have already invaded your life too much. You deserve peace, Harrison, not new trauma. She walked past Victoria without another word, past Jeffrey's satisfied expression, out of the library that had become both sanctuary and trap. The guest house felt different now, each surface a reminder of borrowed time running out. Lily packed with mechanical efficiency, while Emma slept surrounded by stuffed animals that had accumulated over weeks of Harrison's small gifts. Clothes folded, toiletries gathered, the few toys Emma had brought from their old life tucked into corners of the suitcase. Lily cried silently, the kind of weeping that came from the chest without sound, tears falling onto Emma's birthday dress still smelling faintly of cake. She found paper in a drawer, wrote with a pen that kept skipping. "You taught me that good men still exist, that embraces can mean something. Emma will remember you as the first man who treated her with kindness. And I'll remember the man who made me feel seen. Thank you for these months. Take care of yourself. L." Harrison stood alone in the library after they'd gone, surrounded by evidence of Emma's presence that Victoria hadn't thought to remove. The pillow fort still stood in the corner, a testament to an afternoon of architectural collaboration. Emma's drawing remained magnetized to the small refrigerator he'd had installed so she could have juice whenever she wanted. Her crayon rendition of the three of them, holding hands labeled in Lily's handwriting, "My family." The teddy bear he'd given Emma sat abandoned on the sofa where she'd left it while running to say goodbye. Harrison picked it up, remembering the day he'd bought it for Michael, remembering the son who never took a breath, and the rage that filled him was directed at himself, at his weakness, at his inability to choose what mattered over what was safe. His fist connected with the wall before conscious thought, plaster cracking, blood appearing on knuckles he didn't feel. Victoria appeared, her attempt at comfort coming too late and too calculated. "You'll move past this. It's better this way." Harrison's response came from somewhere primal, the voice of someone who'd finally reached the limit of what he could survive losing. "Better for who? For you? For the board? I was dead before them, Victoria. Dead." The word echoed in the massive room, and Victoria actually stepped back, seeing something in her nephew she'd successfully suppressed for 3 years. The capacity to fight, to choose, to risk everything for something that mattered. But her retreat was tactical, already planning how to reinforce the walls around him once this emotional storm passed. Emma woke at 4 crying from a dream she couldn't articulate, her small body shaking with sobs that brought Lily running from where she'd been staring at packed suitcases. "Shh, baby, it's okay, Mama's here." But Emma's request came between hiccups, simple and devastating. "See Daddy Harrison." Lily's heart cracked clean through, her voice gentle but firm. "We can't, love. Not anymore." Emma pulled back, looking at her mother with eyes too wise for 3 years old. The kind of perception children have before the world teaches them to ignore intuition. "But he's sad. He cries like you do." Lily froze, her response automatic. "How do you know?" Emma's explanation came with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting the weather. "I saw. When he thinks nobody's watching. He looks at the picture of the yellow hair lady and cries." The revelation hit Lily like cold water, washing away assumptions she'd built about Harrison being the powerful one, the one in control, the one who held all the cards. Emma had seen what everyone else missed. A man so broken he could only cry when he thought he was alone, clutching a photograph of the family he'd lost while trying to build a new one from pieces. Not the cold billionaire Victoria painted, not the manipulable target Lily supposedly hunted, just a human being desperate for connection and terrified of losing it again. The complexity of what she was walking away from crashed over Lily, but the car was already scheduled. Victoria had already won, and sometimes love meant leaving even when every cell in your body screamed to stay. Dawn came gray and cold, the kind of morning that felt like the world agreeing with bad decisions. Lily stood at the guest house door with suitcases, Emma in her arms, already asking questions about why they were leaving, where they were going, when they'd see Harrison again. The hired car idled in the circular drive, exhaust white in the autumn air. Victoria supervised from the main entrance, her posture radiating satisfaction that she'd successfully eliminated a threat. Harrison watched from his bedroom window, hands pressed against the glass, unable to make himself go downstairs, unable to watch the final moment of departure without falling apart completely. He'd convinced himself this was right, that protecting Lily from Victoria's wrath was noble, that letting her go was the generous choice. Emma saw him in the window, her 3-year-old eyes sharp enough to catch the shadow behind glass. She twisted out of Lily's arms before her mother could stop her, tiny legs carrying her across the drive, past Victoria's startled grab, straight to the mansion's entrance. Her voice carried across the morning, high and clear and completely unaware of adult complexities. "Daddy, I love you." The words bounced off stone and glass, echoing in the space between the guest house and the mansion. between the life they'd started building and the life they were being forced back into. Harrison's forehead dropped against the window, eyes closing, a single tear tracking down his face that no one but him would ever know about. He didn't respond, didn't move, didn't acknowledge the declaration because opening his mouth meant breaking completely. The car door closed with Emma inside, still calling out the window, not understanding why her daddy wasn't answering, why her mother was crying, why everything good was disappearing. Victoria's hand dropped from where it had been raised in farewell, her victory suddenly tasting less sweet than expected. The vehicle pulled away, taking the noise and life with it, leaving behind a silence that was different from the one before. This wasn't the peaceful quiet of a house waiting to be filled. This was the hollow echo of a space that knew what it had lost, that had tasted joy and watched it drive away, because the people meant to protect happiness had confused it with danger. Harrison remained at the window long after the car disappeared, and for the first time since Caroline's funeral, he wondered if survival was worth the cost of safety. 3 weeks crawled by with the speed of geological formation, each day identical to the last in its emptiness. Harrison stopped attending board meetings, stopped answering Victoria's calls about quarterly projections, stopped pretending that running a pharmaceutical empire mattered when the only thing that had made him feel human was gone. His mornings no longer had structure, just endless hours of staring at financial reports he couldn't process, eating food that tasted like cardboard, existing in a mansion that felt bigger and colder than it had even in the darkest days after Caroline. Victoria commanded everything now, signing documents with his electronic signature, making decisions he'd once cared about, watching her nephew deteriorate faster than he had after the funeral. The guilt started small, a whisper she could ignore, then grew teeth. Lily's return to reality hit like jumping into ice water after a warm bath. The studio apartment she found took half her paycheck from the hotel cleaning job, a position that paid $3 less per hour than the Whitmore estate, and came with a supervisor who screamed about missed spots and docked pay for bathroom breaks. She worked doubles when they'd let her, anything to cover the rent that was due yesterday and the bills piling up like accusations on the kitchen counter. Emma had regressed to the child she'd been before Harrison, refusing meals again, waking up screaming at 2 a.m, calling for Daddy who wasn't there. Lily would rock her daughter in the dark, whispering lies about how everything would be okay, guilt eating her alive because what choice had she really had except the one she made? Jeffrey Kramer showed up at Victoria's office unannounced, which was unusual enough to make her pause mid-signature on a contract worth $8 million. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight, holding a folder he seemed reluctant to hand over. When he finally did, his voice carried something she'd never heard from him before: uncertainty. The recordings played on her laptop, tinny but clear, Ryan's voice threatening Lily 2 years ago, his words violent enough to make Victoria flinch, Lily's responses begging him to leave Emma alone, to let them disappear, offering to never ask for child support if he'd just forget they existed. Another recording showed Lily turning down $5,000 cash from a former co-worker who wanted company in exchange, her refusal polite but absolute, even though the desperation in her voice said she needed that money badly. The hospital documents told a different story than the one Victoria had constructed. Emma's emergency surgery at 6 months, intestinal blockage that required immediate intervention, Lily selling her car to make the down payment, taking out predatory loans at 20% interest, because no bank would touch someone with her credit score. Jeffrey's summary came clinical but carried an edge of reproach. She's clean, Mrs. Whitmore. Cleaner than most people with twice her resources. She didn't approach your nephew for money. She didn't even know who he was when she accepted the job through the agency. Victoria sat very still, the words landing like physical blows, forcing her to see what she'd refused to acknowledge. She'd destroyed something real because it looked like something fake. Memories surfaced that Victoria had spent decades burying, images of her younger brother Thomas laughing with the woman their family had rejected. Thomas Whitmore had married a waitress from Queens, someone without pedigree or portfolio, and the family had cut him off completely. Victoria remembered visiting them once in their tiny apartment, seeing Thomas happier than he'd ever been in the mansion, holding his newborn son Harrison with reverence their father had never shown any of them. Thomas died at 38 from a heart defect no one knew he had, and Victoria had taken Harrison, raised him in the world Thomas had abandoned, convinced herself she was correcting her brother's mistake. But watching Harrison now, hollow-eyed and mechanical, she wondered if she'd been projecting her own fears, punishing him for daring to find the same happiness that had been stolen from Thomas too soon. Victoria found Harrison in the library at midnight, surrounded by Emma's abandoned drawings, the teddy bear clutched in his hands like a lifeline. She laid the folder on the table without preamble, let him listen to the recordings, read the documents, see the evidence of Lily's character that contradicted everything Victoria had claimed. Harrison sat motionless through it all, his face a mask, until the last recording ended and the silence became unbearable. Then he exploded, not physically but vocally, his voice carrying 3 weeks of suppressed anguish. "You destroyed the only good thing that happened to me in years." Victoria actually stumbled backward, shocked by the raw pain in his accusation. His next words came quieter but more devastating. "You weren't protecting me, Victoria. You were imprisoning me, keeping me under your control. I'm never going to be the man you want me to be." The declaration hung between them like a severed cord, and Victoria realized with sudden clarity that she'd lost him regardless of whether Lily returned. Harrison was already moving, grabbing his keys, shoving his wallet into pockets, the manic energy of someone who'd been paralyzed and suddenly regained the ability to act. "I'm going after her. Now." Victoria's protest came automatic. "The board," but Harrison's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "Damn the board. I'm resigning, selling my shares. Whatever it takes." He was at the door when Victoria's voice caught him, and for the first time in 20 years she was crying. "What if she doesn't forgive you? What if you're too late?" Harrison turned, his expression carrying a peace she hadn't seen since he was a child. "Then at least I'll know I tried." The search consumed 3 days of Harrison's life like a fever. Lily's old apartment building had a new tenant, a college student who'd never heard of Lily Chen. The community daycare said Emma hadn't been back, offered no forwarding information. Harrison drove through neighborhoods he'd never visited, checking hospitals where she might have taken Emma for follow-ups, hotels that hired cleaners without asking questions. He showed her picture to desk clerks and supervisors who mostly shrugged, until a housekeeper at a downtown hotel recognized Lily's face. She worked there but called in sick today, something about her daughter's school registration. The woman mentioned offhand that Lily had been excited about getting Emma into a good community school across town, and suddenly Harrison had a direction. Roosevelt Elementary sat in a neighborhood where chain-link fences outnumbered white picket versions, where the playground equipment showed its age but the building showed its care. Harrison arrived at 4, his $1,000 suit drawing stares from mothers in medical scrubs and fast food uniforms, his BMW as out of place as a peacock in a pigeon flock. He stood near the entrance, scanning faces, wondering if this was insane, if showing up like this made him a stalker instead of someone trying to fix the biggest mistake of his life. Then the doors opened, children flooding out in a wave of backpacks and shouting, and he saw them. Lily holding Emma's hand, her frame noticeably thinner, shadows under her eyes dark enough to see from 50 feet away. Emma spotted him first. The little girl's scream cut through playground noise like a siren, her legs pumping as she broke free from Lily's grip and ran with the single-minded focus of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. Lily's attempt to catch her came too late, Emma already launching herself at Harrison with enough force to make him stagger. He caught her automatically, muscle memory from weeks of lifting her responding before conscious thought, and suddenly she was wrapped around him like a koala, face buried in his neck, small body shaking with the kind of sobs that came from relief too big to contain. Harrison's eyes found Lily over Emma's head, and the look on her face was complex enough to require a dictionary. Shock, hope, anger, longing, all fighting for dominance behind a wall of self-protection she'd obviously built in the weeks since leaving. Harrison lowered himself to his knees on the concrete, Emma still clinging to him, bringing himself to Lily's eye level in a gesture of supplication he'd never made to anyone. His voice came rough with disuse and emotion. "I want to apologize. For not fighting for you, for letting fear win, for believing even for a second that you were capable of manipulation." Lily's response came sharp with defensive sarcasm, armor against hope that might shatter her. "And now? You figured out I'm good enough?" But Harrison shook his head, his voice breaking on the truth he should have spoken weeks ago. "You always were. I'm the one who didn't think I deserved to be happy again, who convinced myself that wanting you was selfish, that I'd ruin your life with my complications." The words spilled out like water through a broken dam, everything he'd rehearsed during 3 days of searching, and everything he hadn't. "I resigned from the company. I'm selling the shares, most of them anyway. I want to start over, but not alone. I want to do this with you, with Emma." Not as your employer, not as some millionaire playing savior. As a man who loves you both and wants to build something real. Lily's face crumpled, her careful armor developing cracks she couldn't patch fast enough. Ryan gets out in 3 weeks. He's going to come for us, come for Emma. I can't drag you into that fight, Harrison. You don't understand what he's like when he's angry. Harrison's response came immediate and absolute. Then let me help you fight. Let me be the father Emma deserves. Let me be the man standing beside you when the world gets hard. Lily's mouth opened, the word yes forming on lips that had forgotten what saying yes to good things felt like, when the screech of tires cut through the moment. A pickup truck skidded to a stop at the curb, dented and loud, the kind of vehicle driven by someone who maintained it himself because mechanics cost money he didn't have. The man who emerged had the lean build of someone who'd stayed fit in prison through push-ups and rage. Tattoos climbing his neck in designs that probably meant something in whatever hierarchy he'd existed in. Ryan Chen's eyes locked on the scene in front of him with an expression that mixed possessive fury with calculated malice, and his voice carried across the space with absolute ownership. So this is how it is, Lily? Already found yourself a rich replacement? Emma's reaction was instinctive, pressing herself into Harrison's chest, making herself smaller, her small voice whimpering no, in a way that made clear this wasn't the first time she'd been scared of her biological father. Ryan's smile at that response was cruel, designed to hurt everyone watching. Get my daughter away from that clown, Lily. Now. He started forward with the swagger of someone who'd spent 3 years learning to intimidate through posture alone. Harrison stood slowly, carefully transferring Emma to Lily's arms before stepping forward to place himself between Ryan and his family. The word family echoed in his mind with absolute certainty, claim superseding biology. They stood eye to eye, Harrison's height advantage offset by Ryan's prison-learned aggression, neither backing down while parents began pulling their children away from the confrontation brewing. The schoolyard fell silent except for the sound of Ryan's breathing and the distant traffic, everyone waiting to see what would happen when a man who'd never thrown a punch in his life faced someone who'd learned to survive on violence. Harrison's voice came steady despite the adrenaline making his hands shake. Emma's not going anywhere with you. Not today. Not without a court order and supervised visitation. Ryan's laugh was ugly, designed to belittle. And you think you're gonna stop me? Rich boy who probably never got his hands dirty? His weight shifted forward, a fighter's stance, and Harrison had exactly 3 seconds to decide if he was willing to get hurt for people who weren't technically his, for a child who called him daddy, for a woman he loved more than safety. The answer settled in his chest like certainty made solid. Absolutely yes. Ryan's sneer carried the practiced cruelty of someone who'd spent years perfecting how to make people feel small with just his expression. Look at this. Prince Charming came to rescue the damsel. His voice dripped with mockery designed to humiliate Harrison in front of the growing crowd of parents and teachers. But Harrison's response came without hesitation, his voice carrying across the schoolyard with absolute conviction. I came to get my family. The word landed like a claim staked in concrete, and Ryan's face twisted with rage at the audacity. Yours? That's my daughter, you... But Lily stepped between them before Ryan could finish, her voice finally carrying the strength she'd been building for 3 years. Enough. Ryan, you abandoned us. You don't get to show up now and pretend you have rights. Ryan shifted tactics with the smooth manipulation of someone who knew exactly which buttons to push, his words aimed at Lily but loud enough for everyone to hear. He's going to get tired of you, Lily. A man like that? With money like that? You think he wants the poor life? Waking up at 5, counting bus fare, eating ramen 3 nights a week? Each word was a dart aimed at her deepest insecurities. The voice in her head that had whispered she wasn't good enough since the day Harrison had first noticed her. You're temporary entertainment, sweetheart. A charity case he'll tell stories about at country clubs. Lily felt herself wavering, the old doubts rushing back until Harrison's voice cut through with steel underneath. I gave it all up. The company, the mansion, everything. For her, for Emma, because they're the only thing that matters. Ryan laughed, the sound harsh and disbelieving, playing to the crowd like this was performance art. Liar. No man walks away from an empire for the help. But Harrison was already reaching for his phone, pulling up documents with the calm of someone who'd anticipated this exact challenge. His voice carried to every parent, teacher, and child within hearing distance. I, Harrison James Whitmore, officially resigned this morning as CEO of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. I signed paperwork selling 60% of my shares. I'm buying a house in this neighborhood. Small, simple, Because I want to be close to the woman I love and the daughter I've chosen as mine. He held up the phone, showing the resignation letter with official letterhead, the stock transfer agreements with today's date, the real estate contract for a 3-bedroom house 6 blocks away. The whispers started immediately, parents pulling out phones to Google his name, finding articles about the pharmaceutical heir who'd just walked away from billions. A teacher recognized him from a charity gala, her shocked gasp audible. Ryan's confident stance faltered, his script disrupted by evidence he hadn't expected, by the realization that this wasn't some rich guy slumming for kicks, but someone who'd actually blown up his entire life. Lily stared at Harrison like she was seeing him for the first time, understanding the magnitude of what he'd done in the 3 days since she'd left, the irrevocable choices he'd made before even finding her. Emma peeked out from behind Lily's legs, sensing the shift in power, her small voice cutting through the tension. "That's my daddy. He's staying." Lily turned to face Ryan fully, her body language transforming from defensive to offensive, finding strength she'd forgotten she possessed. "You want Emma? Then prove you can be a father. Show up to hearings, take parenting classes, get stable housing and employment. But you're not taking her today by force and scaring her. There's something called justice, custody proceedings, legal process." Ryan's face darkened, his hand coming up in a gesture that made Lily flinch from muscle memory. But Harrison moved faster than thought, positioning himself as a wall. The sound of sirens cut through the standoff, 2 police cars pulling up because some parent had called the moment Ryan started making threats. The officers stepped out, and one of them recognized Ryan immediately, addressing him by name with the weariness of someone who'd arrested him before. Ryan was loaded into the back of the cruiser, still shouting threats about lawyers and rights, his parole officer's number being called to report the confrontation that violated his early release terms. Before the car door closed, he spat one final promise. "This isn't over, Lily. I'll be back." But the threat landed hollow now, his power broken by witnesses and documentation and the reality that he'd shown up ready to intimidate rather than parent. The cruiser pulled away and the crowd slowly dispersed, parents offering Lily supportive nods, teachers squeezing her shoulder in solidarity. Emma emerged fully from hiding, reaching for both Harrison and Lily simultaneously, creating a bridge between them with her small arms. Harrison lifted her onto his hip naturally, his other hand finding Lily's, and they stood there in the aftermath, breathing like survivors of something that could have gone much worse. 3 days later, Harrison drove them back to the Whitmore mansion for the last time, needing to collect personal items before the new owners took possession in a month. Victoria met them at the entrance, her posture lacking its usual rigid authority, something softer in the way she held herself. The silence stretched uncomfortable until Victoria broke it with words that clearly cost her. "I judged you wrong." She looked directly at Lily, really looked at her for the first time without the filter of suspicion and protection. "I thought you were like the others, the ones who circled Harrison after Caroline died, smelling money and vulnerability. But you just wanted work, to care for your daughter, and somehow you ended up caring for him too." Lily stood speechless, unsure how to respond to an apology from someone who'd orchestrated her exile. Victoria extended her hand, the gesture formal but genuine. "Thank you for bringing him back to life." Harrison and Victoria's final conversation happened in the library where so much had unraveled, both of them standing rather than sitting, the formality a shield against too much emotion. Victoria confessed to fears she'd carried since Thomas died, to projecting her trauma onto Harrison's choices, to confusing control with love for so many years, she'd forgotten the difference. "You didn't need to protect me from love, Victoria. You needed to let me feel again." Harrison's voice held no anger anymore, just weary understanding of how fear could make people hurt the ones they meant to save. They didn't embrace because neither was built that way, but something fundamental shifted between them, an acknowledgement of mistakes and a tentative path toward repair. Victoria's final gift came in legal documents. "The guest house is yours, deeded to Lily, Emma, and you. Nobody can take it. And if the neighborhood house doesn't work out, you always have somewhere to land." The custody battle unfolded over 6 weeks of court appearances, legal filings and testimonies that laid bare the history Ryan wanted buried. His abandonment, documented through 3 years of 0 child support and 0 contact. His criminal record, presented by a prosecutor who remembered his case. The threats captured on Lily's old voicemails, played in a courtroom that made him look small and mean. Harrison hired the best family law attorney in the state, presenting it as a gift rather than rescue, respecting Lily's agency while providing resources she'd never had access to before. The final hearing came on a Tuesday, the judge asking Emma gently who she wanted as her father. Emma's response was immediate, her small finger pointing at Harrison. "My daddy." The judge noted it in her decision, granting Lily sole legal custody, restricting Ryan to supervised visits he never showed up for anyway. The house Harrison bought was a universe away from the mansion, but felt more like home within a week. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen where you could touch both walls at once, and a backyard with a swing set Harrison assembled wrong twice before getting it right. He learned to cook through trial and error, burning pasta and undercooking chicken before finally mastering scrambled eggs and toast. Lily taught him with patience and laughter, finding joy in his willingness to fail repeatedly without giving up. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator, layers upon layers of crayon families and houses with hearts. The neighbors were suspicious at first of the ex-billionaire moving into their working-class block, but Harrison won them over by showing up to help fix Mr. Rodriguez's fence, joining the weekend soccer games with kids who taught him rules he'd never learned, attending PTA meetings where he listened more than he spoke. 6 months passed in the kind of ordinary happiness people write songs about, mornings bleeding into afternoons into evenings of homework help and grocery shopping and figuring out how to stretch a budget. Harrison woke one Saturday to Emma jumping on the bed demanding pancakes, and he made them himself, actually getting them fluffy instead of rubbery for the first time. Lily came into the kitchen in pajamas, hair messy, no makeup, looking more beautiful than any woman he'd seen at charity galas in designer gowns. He waited until Emma was distracted by syrup to say her name just once. "Lily." She turned with a questioning smile and found him on one knee beside the table. No fancy ring box yet, just his hands empty and open and his heart completely visible in his face. His proposal came without poetry or rehearsal, just truth. "You gave me back my life. Emma gave me purpose. I don't have a mansion to offer anymore, no empire, but I have 2 hands that will work for you every day, a heart that finally remembered how to beat, and a promise that I'll never let you feel cold or hungry or afraid. Marry me?" Emma's shriek of "Say yes, Mama," nearly drowned out Lily's sobbing laugh, her head nodding before words could form, her yes 1,000 times yes coming out broken and perfect. Harrison slid a twist tie from a bread bag onto her finger as a placeholder, promising a real ring when the jewelry store opened Monday, but Lily shook her head. "This is perfect. This is us." Emma launched herself into the group hug, pancakes forgotten, sticky syrup hands leaving prints on everyone's clothes, and none of them cared. 2 years later, the backyard held 30 folding chairs arranged in rows facing a makeshift arch decorated with flowers from neighbors' gardens. Victoria sat in the front row wearing a smile that looked unpracticed but genuine, having slowly learned that protecting Harrison meant supporting his choices rather than controlling them. Emma, now 4 and taking her flower girl duties seriously, scattered petals in completely wrong directions, making guests laugh instead of walking the straight path. The ceremony was officiated by Judge Morrison, the same woman who'd granted Lily custody, who'd agreed to do this off the clock because she believed in their story. Harrison's vows, written on notebook paper, shook in his hands. "You taught me that wealth has nothing to do with money. That home isn't a place, it's people who see you." Lily's vows came on the same kind of paper, her handwriting neat despite the tears already falling. "You taught me I deserve to be loved exactly as I am, that my past doesn't define my future, that choosing each other every day is what makes a family real." They exchanged rings bought with saved money from Harrison's new job managing operations at a community health clinic, simple gold bands that meant everything because they'd been chosen together. The kiss was witnessed by a crowd that included former mansion staff, Lily's old neighbors, parents from Emma's school, and Mr. Rodriguez, who'd become a surrogate grandfather. Rice flew as they walked back down the aisle, Emma between them holding both their hands, leading them toward a reception of potluck dishes and a cake baked by 3 different neighbors working together. The final scene played out on a random Thursday evening, nothing special marking it except that it was perfectly ordinary. Dinner at the kitchen table that seated 4, Harrison, Lily, Emma, and a high chair holding Michael, their newborn son who'd arrived 3 months ago with Harrison's eyes and Lily's determination. The meal was simple, chicken and rice and vegetables, food that filled bellies without costing a fortune. Emma narrated her day at pre-K while Harrison bounced Michael and Lily served plates, the choreography of family life they'd learned through practice. Harrison looked around the small kitchen with its chipped linoleum and outdated appliances, comparing it mentally to the mansion's formal dining room, and felt nothing but gratitude for the trade. This Formica table held more value than any mahogany ever could. Emma presented her latest artwork, a crayon masterpiece showing 4 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a heart above it. Lily hung it on the refrigerator next to dozens of others, creating a gallery of their life in primary colors. Tucked in the corner, barely visible under a grocery list, was an old postcard of the Whitmore mansion that Victoria had sent as a reminder of where he'd come from. Harrison never looked at it anymore. That chapter closed so completely it felt like someone else's story. That world had ended the day he chose love over legacy. This world, small and loud and chaotic, had begun when he'd learned that the greatest wealth was being seen, being chosen, being loved not for what you had, but for who you were underneath everything else. Sometimes the richest life is the one where you find people who see you when you're invisible to everyone else, who stay when you lose everything that's supposed to matter, who transform an empty mansion into a home full of laughter by teaching you that square footage means nothing compared to the size of hearts gathered around a table. Harrison found that in a woman he almost lost to fear, a woman who taught him that love doesn't care about class or money or the world's definitions of success. Lily found it in a man who proved that choosing someone means choosing them every single day, through hard times and simple joys, through burnt pancakes and midnight feedings and all the beautiful ordinary moments that make up a life. And Emma, the little girl who'd refused to eat until the millionaire did the improbable, grew up knowing she'd been the bridge that brought 2 broken people together and made them whole. What would you do in their place? Would you risk everything for love? Would you choose happiness over security? Connection over control? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you'd decide. And if this story touched your heart, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that remind us that in the end, love always wins. Not because it's easy, but because it's worth fighting for, every single time.